If you're over 55 and you drink milk every single day, there's something you need to know before your next glass. It's not about giving up milk. It's not about some scary new study. It's about one simple mix-up that millions of people make without realizing it, and it could be quietly working against your blood sugar every single morning. Here's the strange part. Most people assume milk is milk. Pour it in your coffee, pour it over cereal, and move on with your day. But when it comes to blood sugar and diabetes management, not all milks behave the same way inside your body. Some can help you stay steady through the morning. Others can set you up for a spike you won't even notice happening. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly which milks tend to be gentler on blood sugar, which ones can catch people off guard, and how to make a simple switch that fits into your life without turning your kitchen upside down. And a little later, we'll talk about one popular healthy milk that actually surprises a lot of people. It's not the villain everyone expects, and it's not the hero either. Stick around for that one. Let's start with why this even matters. If you're managing type 2 diabetes, or you're simply trying to keep your blood sugar steady as you get older, breakfast is often the hardest part of the day. Your body's sensitivity to insulin, that's the hormone that helps move sugar out of your blood and into your cells for energy, tends to be a little lower first thing in the morning for a lot of people. That means the same bowl of cereal or the same cup of coffee with milk can raise your blood sugar more at 7 a.m. than it would at 7 p.m. Milk plays a bigger role in that morning picture than most people expect. It's not just a splash in your coffee. For many older adults, milk shows up 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a day. In coffee, in cereal, in a glass on its own, in cooking. Small differences in that one ingredient can add up over the course of a week. So let's break down what actually matters when you're looking at a carton of milk. The first thing to understand is carbohydrates, because carbs are what turn into sugar in your bloodstream. Milk, real dairy milk, naturally contains a sugar called lactose. It's not added sugar, it's just part of what milk is. A cup of regular cow's milk has around 12 grams of carbohydrate, almost entirely from that natural lactose. 12 grams doesn't sound like a lot, and on its own, it usually isn't a big problem for most people. The issue comes from what's mixed in around it. Sweetened flavored milks, sugary cereals, or large portions poured without measuring. That's where the numbers can quietly climb. Now here's an example a lot of people relate to. Think about a retired grandfather who has 2 bowls of cereal most mornings because it's just cereal. How bad can it be? 2 bowls means double the milk and double the cereal carbs. On paper, neither felt like a big decision in the moment. Add them together, and that's a very different breakfast for blood sugar than a single smaller bowl. This is where a simple habit can help more than people expect. Measuring milk once, just to see what a cup actually looks like in your favorite glass or bowl. Most people are surprised. What they've been calling 1 cup is often 1.5. Let's move to the second big factor. Protein and fat, because these two work almost like brakes on how fast sugar hits your bloodstream. When you drink something that has protein and a bit of fat alongside its natural carbs, your body tends to digest it more slowly. Slower digestion generally means a gentler rise in blood sugar instead of a fast spike followed by a crash. Whole milk has more fat than skim milk, and that fat can slow digestion slightly. But whole milk also has more saturated fat, which matters for heart health, something else worth keeping an eye on if you're already managing diabetes, since heart disease risk tends to travel alongside it. Skim milk has less fat, so it may digest a little faster, but it's also lighter in calories, which matters if weight management is part of your plan. Neither one is automatically bad. It depends on your overall goals, and this is exactly the kind of detail worth going over with your doctor or a dietitian who knows your full health picture, your cholesterol, your weight goals, your medications. There is no single universal answer that fits everyone the same way, and anyone who tells you otherwise probably hasn't looked at your actual numbers. Now let's talk about the plant-based milks, because this is where a lot of confusion happens, and where that surprising middle ground milk I mentioned earlier comes in. Unsweetened almond milk is often praised as a great option for blood sugar, and there's a good reason for that. It's naturally very low in carbohydrates, often just 1 or 2 grams per cup when it's unsweetened. That's a fraction of what dairy milk contains. For many people focused purely on minimizing carbs, that number looks fantastic. But here's the catch almost nobody mentions. Almond milk is also very low in protein, usually just 1 gram per cup compared to about 8 grams in dairy milk. Protein matters for a lot of reasons as we get older. It helps maintain muscle, it helps you feel full, and it plays a role in how steady your blood sugar stays over the following hours. A milk that's extremely low in carbs, but also extremely low in protein, isn't automatically the healthiest overall choice. It's just low in one specific number that people tend to fixate on. Unsweetened soy milk tends to be the closest plant-based match to dairy in terms of that protein content, usually around 7 or 8 grams per cup, with a similar or slightly lower carbohydrate count than regular milk. For people who want a plant-based option but still want that protein break working for them, soy milk is often the closer comparison, nutritionally speaking, rather than almond milk. Oat milk is where a lot of people get caught by surprise, and this is the one worth pausing on. Oat milk has built a reputation as a wholesome, hearty, good-for-you choice. It's creamy, it's popular in coffee shops, and it feels like a healthy swap. But oat milk is naturally higher in carbohydrates than most other milk options, often between 15 and 20 grams per cup, sometimes more depending on the brand, and that's before any added sugar. Some oat milks also have added sugar stacked on top of that natural carbohydrate content, which can push the number even higher. That doesn't make oat milk something to fear. It just means oat doesn't automatically mean lower sugar impact, and that's the mix-up we opened this video with. A lot of people switch from dairy to oat milk, assuming they've made the safer choice for their blood sugar, when in some cases they've actually increased their carbohydrate intake without realizing it. So what does this mean in practical terms? It means the label matters more than the marketing. Whatever milk is sitting in your fridge right now, take 30 seconds next time you're at the store, or even just check the carton at home, and look specifically at 2 numbers: total carbohydrates per serving and grams of protein per serving. Those 2 numbers together tell you far more than the front of the package ever will. Let's also talk about something just as important as which milk you choose, and that's the unsweetened word. Flavored milks, whether it's dairy or a plant-based alternative, often carry a significant amount of added sugar on top of whatever is naturally there. Vanilla almond milk, chocolate oat milk, sweetened soy milk. These can look similar to their plain counterparts on the shelf, but the nutrition numbers can be dramatically different. A splash of vanilla almond milk might seem harmless, but check the label, and you may find it has more sugar per cup than a can of regular soda. This is one of those small habits that makes a real difference without requiring a total lifestyle overhaul. Whenever you're buying a plant-based milk, look for the word unsweetened on the front of the carton. It's a small word, but it often represents the biggest difference in sugar content on that entire shelf. Now, here's something worth mentioning about dairy milk specifically, because there's ongoing research that's genuinely interesting, even though it's still developing. Some studies have looked at fermented dairy products, things like plain yogurt and kefir, and found associations with better blood sugar management in some populations. The thinking is that fermentation changes the way the natural sugars and proteins behave, and it may also support gut bacteria in ways that could influence blood sugar indirectly. It's important to be honest here. This is an area of ongoing research, not a settled, proven cure. Nobody should treat yogurt or kefir as a replacement for medication or medical care. But if you already enjoy plain, unsweetened yogurt, it's reassuring to know that current evidence leans toward it being a reasonable, even potentially helpful, part of a blood sugar-conscious diet, especially compared to flavored, sugar-added versions, which can undo much of that potential benefit in one serving. Before we get to your action steps, let's slow down on something a lot of people misunderstand: the glycemic index, and why it can be a helpful tool, but also a bit misleading if you rely on it alone. The glycemic index is a number that ranks how quickly a food raises blood sugar compared to pure sugar. Foods with a low glycemic index tend to raise blood sugar more slowly and gradually. Foods with a high glycemic index tend to cause faster spikes. On paper, this sounds like the perfect shortcut. Just check the number and you're done. Milk actually has a fairly low glycemic index compared to many other foods, dairy or plant-based. But here's the problem with stopping there. The glycemic index only tells you about speed, not about total amount. A food can have a low glycemic index and still contain a large amount of carbohydrate. That's part of why oat milk can catch people off guard. It isn't necessarily digested in a dramatic spike, but the total carbohydrate load per cup is still meaningfully higher than an unsweetened almond or soy milk. This is why many doctors and dietitians now talk about glycemic load instead of just glycemic index, because glycemic load factors in both the speed and the amount. For everyday purposes, you don't need to calculate glycemic load with a calculator every morning. You just need to remember the lesson behind it. Don't judge a food only by how gentle it sounds. Look at the actual serving size and the actual numbers on the label. Let's talk about another everyday scenario, because this is where theory turns into real life. Picture a woman in her early 70s who was told by her doctor a few years ago that her blood sugar was creeping into the pre-diabetes range. She did what a lot of people do. She started reading labels, cut back on obvious sugar like candy and soda, and felt proud of the changes she made. But her morning routine stayed almost the same: 2 cups of coffee, each with a generous pour of flavored oat creamer, because creamer is just a splash. It barely counts. When she finally sat down and checked the label on that creamer, she found it had more added sugar per serving than she expected, and she was using nearly 3 servings each morning without realizing it. Nothing about her morning felt indulgent to her. It felt completely normal. That's exactly why this kind of quiet, repeated habit is often more influential on blood sugar than the occasional dessert someone feels guilty about. The desserts get noticed. The daily splash in the coffee cup often doesn't. This isn't meant to cause guilt. It's meant to highlight how sneaky small daily habits can be and how much power there is in simply becoming aware of them. Awareness, more than restriction, tends to be the first real step toward meaningful change. Let's shift to another practical angle: timing and pairing, because when you drink your milk can matter almost as much as what kind you choose. If you're someone who drinks a glass of milk on its own, away from other food, that milk's natural sugar has less competition, so to speak, and may affect your blood sugar a bit more directly. But if that same milk is part of a meal that includes fiber, protein, and healthy fats, say, milk alongside a breakfast that includes eggs or a handful of nuts, the overall meal tends to digest more slowly, and the blood sugar response is often gentler. This is a helpful principle to remember. Rarely does one single food determine your blood sugar outcome. It's almost always about the whole plate, the whole cup, the whole meal working together. So if you love your morning cereal and milk, consider what's sitting next to it. Adding a source of protein, like a boiled egg, or a spoonful of natural peanut butter, or a source of fiber, like fresh berries, can help soften the impact of the meal as a whole. Let's also address a myth that comes up constantly in health conversations, especially among older adults who grew up in an era when nutrition advice looked very different. The idea that natural sugar is automatically safe simply because it isn't the white granulated sugar sitting in a sugar bowl. Lactose in milk is natural. The sugar in an apple is natural. The sugar in honey is natural. All of these still raise blood sugar because your body processes natural sugar and refined sugar through very similar pathways once they're broken down for energy. The word natural describes where the sugar came from, not how your body responds to it. This doesn't mean natural sugars are just as concerning as heavily processed ones in every case. Fruit, for example, comes packaged with fiber that can slow things down, and milk comes packaged with protein that can do something similar. But natural alone isn't a free pass, and it's worth remembering that the next time a product markets itself as made with only natural sugars on the front label. Now let's talk about portion consistency, because this is one of the most underrated tools in blood sugar management, especially for people managing type 2 diabetes with the guidance of a doctor. Many people focus heavily on which foods to avoid, but consistency in portion size, meal timing, and daily routine often matters just as much as the specific foods chosen. If you drink 1 cup of milk most mornings, your body and your medication routine, if you take medication, can somewhat adjust to that pattern. If one day it's half a cup and the next day it's 2.5 cups poured into a large glass without measuring, that inconsistency can make blood sugar patterns harder to predict, both for you and for your doctor trying to help you manage things well. This is one of the simplest, least glamorous pieces of advice in this entire video, but it may also be one of the most useful. Try to keep your milk portions relatively consistent from day to day. It won't make headlines, but consistency is often the quiet backbone of good blood sugar management. There's one more milk option worth mentioning because it comes up often in questions from viewers, and that's lactose-free milk. Lactose-free milk is regular dairy milk with an enzyme added that breaks down the lactose in advance, which is why it doesn't cause digestive discomfort for people who are lactose intolerant. Here's the part that surprises people. Breaking down that lactose in advance turns it into simpler sugars, primarily glucose and galactose. That means lactose-free milk can sometimes taste slightly sweeter than regular milk, and depending on the brand, its effect on blood sugar can be a little different from standard dairy milk, even though the total carbohydrate count on the label often looks similar. If lactose-free milk is part of your routine, it's worth paying attention to how you personally feel and respond after drinking it, and mentioning it specifically to your doctor, since this is exactly the kind of small detail that's easy to overlook but can matter for your particular situation. Let's also talk briefly about movement, because blood sugar management is never just about what's in your glass. It's about the whole picture of your day. Something as simple as a short walk after a meal that includes milk, even just 10 to 15 minutes, can help your muscles use some of that sugar for energy, which may soften the rise in your blood sugar afterward. This isn't about intense exercise or anything that feels like a burden. For many older adults, a gentle walk to the mailbox and back, or a stroll around the yard after breakfast, can quietly support everything else we've talked about today. Of course, if you have mobility limitations or other health conditions, it's worth checking with your doctor about what kind of movement is safe and appropriate for you specifically. Now let's talk for a moment about medications, because this is an area where personal guidance matters more than anything a general video can offer. Some diabetes medications are timed around meals, and some can interact with how your body processes carbohydrates, including the natural sugar in milk. If you're on insulin or any medication that manages blood sugar, changing your milk habits, especially significantly increasing or decreasing your intake, is exactly the kind of change worth mentioning to your doctor or pharmacist beforehand, not after the fact. This isn't meant to be alarming. It's simply a reminder that the small daily choices we're discussing today work best when they're made alongside the professionals who know your complete health history. Let's also take a moment to talk about grocery store reality, because knowing all of this information doesn't help much if you're standing in the dairy aisle feeling overwhelmed by 15 different cartons. Here's a simple approach that tends to work well. When you're comparing milk options, pick up 2 cartons at a time and turn them so the nutrition labels face you side by side. Look first at the serving size, because some cartons quietly use a smaller serving size to make their numbers look better than a competitor's. Then compare total carbohydrates, then protein. If a plant-based option doesn't say unsweetened clearly on the front, assume it likely has added sugar until the label proves otherwise. This 30-second habit, done once or twice until it becomes familiar, can replace a lot of guesswork with real confidence the next time you shop. Before we move to your takeaways, let's talk honestly about something that doesn't get discussed enough in health videos: the emotional side of changing habits you've had for decades. For a lot of people watching this, milk isn't just a nutrition fact on a label. It's the glass you poured for your kids at breakfast for 20 years. It's the splash in your coffee that's been part of your morning ritual since before some of these plant-based alternatives even existed on store shelves. Being told that a lifelong habit might need a small adjustment can feel oddly personal, even when it's really just about biology and blood sugar. If any part of this video made you feel a little defensive, or made you think, well, I've had milk in my coffee my whole life and I'm fine, that reaction is completely understandable, and you're not alone in feeling it. The goal here was never to make anyone feel judged for what's in their refrigerator. The goal is simply to hand you information that your doctor or grandmother's generation may not have had easy access to, so you can make small, informed choices that fit your own life and your own health goals at your own pace. Change doesn't have to happen all at once, and it definitely doesn't have to happen perfectly. If everything in this video simply makes you a little more curious the next time you're standing in the dairy aisle, or a little more likely to glance at a nutrition label before tossing something in your cart, that's genuinely meaningful progress. Small, sustainable shifts tend to last far longer than dramatic overnight overhauls, especially when it comes to something as ingrained as our daily food habits. Let's bring this back to something practical you can actually use this week. If you're trying to be more mindful of milk's effect on your blood sugar, here are a few realistic habits, not drastic changes. First, measure your milk at least once, just to know what your usual pour actually looks like in a measuring cup. Most people are surprised by the real number. Second, get comfortable reading 2 numbers on any milk carton: total carbohydrates and protein per serving. Not fat, not calories first. Those 2 first. Third, if you enjoy plant-based milk, Always reach for the unsweetened version. It's often sitting right next to the sweetened one. Same brand, completely different sugar content. Fourth, remember that healthy sounding doesn't always mean lower carbohydrate. Oat milk being marketed as wholesome doesn't cancel out its natural carb content. Judge the label, not the branding. And fifth, this one matters most. Talk to your doctor or a registered dietitian about your specific situation. Your medications, your other health conditions, your personal blood sugar patterns all affect which milk choice makes the most sense for you. What works well for your neighbor might not be the right fit for you, and that's completely normal. Diabetes management is personal, not one size fits all. If you've noticed your own blood sugar reacting differently depending on what kind of milk you drink, that's actually valuable information, and it's worth mentioning to your doctor at your next visit, even if it seems minor. Small patterns like that can be genuinely useful for fine-tuning your care. Let's do a quick recap of what we covered today. Regular dairy milk contains natural sugar called lactose, generally around 12 grams per cup, and its protein and fat content can help slow how quickly that sugar affects your blood. Unsweetened almond milk is very low in carbohydrates but also very low in protein, so it isn't automatically the best all-around choice despite its popularity. Unsweetened soy milk tends to be the closest plant-based match to dairy and protein content, making it a strong option for people who want a plant-based swap without giving up that protein benefit. Oat milk, despite its wholesome reputation, is often higher in natural carbohydrates than people expect and can carry added sugar on top of that in flavored versions. And fermented dairy products like plain yogurt and kefir show promising, though still developing, research around blood sugar support, as long as they're unsweetened. None of this means throwing out what's in your fridge today. It means making small, informed adjustments where they matter and having an honest conversation with your healthcare provider about what fits your specific needs. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these surprised you the most? The oat milk carbohydrate content, the almond milk protein gap, or something else entirely? Drop a comment and let us know, and if you feel comfortable sharing, tell us your age and where you're watching from. This community has viewers from all over the world, and it's always encouraging to see how many people are taking their health seriously at every stage of life. If you found this helpful, consider sharing it with a friend or family member who might benefit from it too, and we'll see you in the next video.